You laughed at me yesterday. Now I'm the only reason you still have your empire.
Maybe the waitress has a tip for my next big trade. She looks like she knows a thing or two about finance, right? The words dropped like a spark in dry grass. A burst of laughter followed. Sharp, ugly. A table full of wealthy men in tailored suits, sipping $1,000 whiskey under the golden lights of the Marigold Room, Savannah's most exclusive restaurant. And in the center of them sat Conrad Everhart, billionaire CEO of Everhart Capital, looking smug and satisfied. He didn't expect a response. The joke wasn't meant to be answered, it was meant to humiliate. But Imani Pierce didn't flinch. She placed the wine bottle gently on the table, adjusted her apron, and turned toward him. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaken. "Actually," she said, her eyes meeting his without blinking, "I do." For a second, the room held its breath. And in that stillness, something shifted. This wasn't just a moment of tension. It was a crack in the foundation, a line drawn across decades of silence, bias, and polished cruelty. What began as a cruel joke aimed at a black waitress became a 48-hour corporate storm that would flip a financial empire on its head. And the woman at the center of it all? She didn't have a title, she didn't have a corner office, but she had something far more dangerous. She knew the truth. This is hidden worth, and what you're about to hear is a black story that deserves to be told in full. It's about power, perception, and what happens when someone who's always been overlooked finally chooses to be seen. So if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or talked over, this one's for you. And if you're new here, welcome to the place where untold voices get the spotlight they've earned. You might want to stick around, just hit subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one. Now, take a breath. Because this story starts with a joke and ends with the kind of answer that makes the room go silent. Before she was a waitress in a fine dining restaurant serving the city's elite, Imani Pierce was a numbers girl. She loved patterns, she loved puzzles, she could read a spreadsheet like it was a poem. At 19, she was one of the top finance students at UCLA. Her professors used to say she had a mind made for money. Not greed, not flash, just a deep intuitive understanding of how systems moved. But life doesn't always care about your GPA. When her mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, everything stopped. The savings dried up faster than they could blink. And when the bills started coming in 5 digits at a time, the family house followed. Then came the food stamps, the notices taped to the door, the quiet shame of not being able to fix any of it. Imani dropped out, not because she failed, but because she had no choice. She came back to Savannah, the city where she was born, and got to work. She took 2 jobs. During the day, she freelanced bookkeeping, tax prep, anything with a spreadsheet. At night, she waited tables at the Marigold Room, a restaurant so expensive it didn't even list prices on the menu. It was a place of whispered power deals and private toasts, where every bottle of wine cost more than a month of rent. But she never let the shine blind her. Imani listened. She watched. She remembered faces, names, ticker symbols. The men at those tables spoke freely around her, as if her apron made her invisible. But she never stopped learning. At home, she would read SEC filings like bedtime stories. She could spot inconsistencies in quarterly reports, the way some people spotted typos. She followed mergers and acquisitions the way others followed celebrity breakups. She didn't have a degree, she didn't have credentials, but she had clarity and hunger. Not the kind that makes you desperate, the kind that makes you patient. So when Conrad Everhart mocked her in front of his table of investors, he assumed she was just another face in the background, a pair of hands carrying champagne flutes and silent smiles. But what he didn't know was that Imani Pierce had once walked the halls he lived in now. And she remembered every door that had been slammed in her face. Conrad Everhart was a man used to being listened to. He wore his power the way others wore aftershave, bold, unmistakable, and just a little overwhelming. Every move he made was deliberate. His tailored navy suits, the dark loafers polished to a mirror shine, the silver Omega watch always peeking from beneath his cuff, all of it said the same thing: I win. And in most rooms he did. Conrad had built Everhart Capital from a boutique hedge fund into one of the most aggressive, high-profile investment firms in the Southeast. His name carried weight on Wall Street, and his face had been on the cover of at least 3 business magazines. They called him the Shark of Savannah. Ruthless, precise, a man who never blinked. He had the kind of success that made other men nervous and made the waitstaff double-check their posture. But Conrad had a flaw, one invisible to most. He believed respect was something you extracted, not something you earned. And worse, he saw humility as weakness. He was the type of man who used a compliment as a setup for a joke, who spoke in boardrooms the way others spoke in locker rooms. His circle laughed when he laughed, nodded when he nodded. No one challenged him. Not really. At his favorite table in the Marigold Room, he was a king. The sommelier greeted him by name. The kitchen made off-menu items just for him. The staff was trained to anticipate his preferences before he ever asked. And that silver watch on his wrist? It was a symbol. It wasn't just about time, it was about control, precision, discipline. It ticked in quiet dominance as he closed deals worth millions over scallops and caviar. So when he looked at Imani Pierce and made that joke about her giving him financial advice, it wasn't out of curiosity. It was cruelty, disguised as charm. Because to Conrad, the idea that a black waitress in her 20s could offer him insight was absurd. It threatened his hierarchy, his illusion of superiority. And when she responded, when she actually answered, he didn't just feel surprised. He felt insulted. That moment, as small as it seemed, cracked something. Because men like Conrad Everhart don't fear being wrong. They fear being wrong in front of people they think are beneath them. What Conrad didn't realize, what no one at that table could have guessed, was that Imani Pierce had seen the Farrell deal long before it ever reached the headlines. Not because she was an insider, not because she had a source, but because she had been watching. 3 months earlier, she had picked up a freelance gig through an online finance platform. It was small, just a short-term contract to help a boutique accounting firm clean up year-end statements for a client they refused to name. She was given access to cloud folders, blind-labeled spreadsheets, and a directive to clean the inconsistencies quietly. The data was messy, too messy for a firm that claimed to be preparing for a major acquisition. She noticed things: duplicate payments, misreported assets, a missing audit trail for one of their offshore accounts. She asked a few polite questions, and within hours, her access was revoked. The contract was closed early due to restructuring. But the numbers stayed in her head. They always did. So when she overheard the name Farrell Industries whispered at table 6, when she saw Conrad Everhart lean in and mention a soft launch in the third quarter, something clicked. That messy data set? That was Farrell. And the problems she'd flagged? They weren't accidents. They were patterns, carefully crafted ones. It wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was manipulation, possibly even fraud. She kept her face neutral as she poured the wine. But inside, her mind was racing. She knew that if Everhart Capital went through with the acquisition as it stood, they'd be absorbing a time bomb. Federal regulators would catch on eventually. SEC violations, penalties, maybe worse. And when that happened, Conrad wouldn't just lose money, he'd lose credibility. That was why, when he mocked her and asked for advice, she didn't hesitate. She gave him the truth. Not because she wanted recognition, not even because she wanted revenge. She did it because staying silent felt worse. Because if someone's going to laugh at you, you might as well leave them something to choke on. Imani didn't need a degree on the wall to know what she saw. She didn't need a corner office to see through a lie. She had a memory like steel. And she had seen the blueprint of the storm before anyone else knew it was coming. For the next 5 minutes, no one at the table touched their food. The steak went cold. The wine sat untouched. Even the laughter, so loud and careless just moments earlier, had disappeared. Conrad Everhart stared at Imani like she was a riddle wrapped in something deeply inconvenient. He didn't speak, not at first. But his expression said everything. Confusion, irritation, a flicker of fear. He wasn't used to feeling those things, not in public. Imani, for her part, simply resumed her duties. She refilled the water glasses, cleared a half-empty bread basket, then walked away with the same quiet grace she'd walked in with. No smile. No follow-up. She wasn't performing. She had already said what she needed to say. 2 minutes later, Conrad stood up from the table. He pulled his phone from his jacket, stepped away under the guise of taking a call, and walked straight to the valet corridor near the kitchen. He didn't make a call. He opened a secure app used only for internal communication within Everhart Capital. He pinged his assistant code red priority. The reply came fast, and when it did, his face tightened. "Sir," the assistant wrote, "what she said checks out. The SEC is reviewing recent filings from Farrell's offshore subsidiary. Quietly, but it's happening." Conrad didn't reply. He didn't have to. The world shifted beneath his feet in that moment. A waitress had just saved him from walking into a regulatory buzzsaw, and had done it so casually, so confidently, that it rattled him more than he cared to admit. He returned to the table, slower this time. His posture was more guarded. The others noticed. The mood had changed. He forced a chuckle, trying to recover the room. "Well," he said, raising his glass. "Guess you never know who's listening." It was meant to be disarming, a humble nod, but it rang hollow. Because everyone at that table knew the truth. Conrad Everhart, the man who mocked people beneath his tax bracket, had just been schooled in front of a dozen witnesses by a black waitress with no Ivy League credentials, no title, and no business card. And he had no idea what to do about it. The dinner continued, but it was different now. Because once a man like Conrad bleeds in the water, the sharks at his own table start to circle. The next morning, the sky over Savannah was still gray when the knock came. Imani had just poured her first cup of coffee, standing barefoot in her tiny apartment with the window cracked open. She wasn't thinking about the night before. She had learned not to. Moments like that didn't linger. They passed. They always did. She opened the door to find a man in a charcoal suit standing on the other side, tall and uncomfortable, like someone who didn't know how to be on her side of town. "Miss Pierce?" he asked. She nodded, her guard up. He reached into his coat and handed her a sealed envelope with an embossed crest. She didn't have to read the return address to know where it came from. "Everhart Capital. He asked me to deliver this personally," the man said. "He'd like to meet." Before she could say anything, he added, "Today, noon, his office, private." Then, just as quickly, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. Imani stared at the envelope in her hand for a long moment. Her first instinct was to toss it in the trash. She had no interest in whatever apology or explanation Conrad Everhart thought he owed her. But her curiosity, always sharper than her pride, pulled her in. She broke the seal. Inside was a short, hand-signed note. "Miss Pierce, yesterday, you saved me from a serious mistake. That fact is not lost on me. I would like to speak with you in private, and on equal footing. No tricks, no performances, just a conversation. If you choose not to come, I'll understand. But if you do, I think we both might walk away with something more than we expected. Sincerely, Conrad Everhart." Imani folded the letter slowly. Her fingers lingered on the edge, her mind running through every reason to ignore it. But something about the tone was different. It wasn't polished. It wasn't defensive. It almost read like a man unsure of how to ask for help. She didn't trust him, not even close. But she wasn't afraid of him either. So at 11:55 a.m., Imani Pierce, dressed in the same blazer she wore to her mother's funeral, stepped into a cab headed toward a part of town where people like her weren't usually invited. The Everhart Capital headquarters sat like a gleaming monolith in downtown Savannah, 28 stories of steel, glass, and calculated intimidation. Most people only ever saw the first-floor lobby, where marble floors and oversized art whispered wealth with every echo. Imani stepped out of the elevator on the 27th floor. The receptionist didn't ask who she was. Apparently, her name had already traveled further than she thought. A quiet nod, and she was escorted to a glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. The view was beautiful, intentionally so, designed to disarm. Conrad Everhart was already inside, seated at the far end of the table. Alone, no assistants, no legal team. Just him. And that silver watch on his wrist, still ticking. He stood when she entered. "Miss Pierce," he said, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming." Imani didn't sit right away. She let her eyes scan the room. The glass was thick, soundproof. The walls were clear, but the space was private. A fishbowl, but with power on the inside. After a moment, she took the seat. Conrad leaned forward, folding his hands together. There was no smirk this time, no air of amusement. "I owe you an apology," he began, his tone low, deliberate. Not just for what I said, but for how I said it. Imani tilted her head slightly, giving nothing away. You were right about Farrell, he continued. We were days away from a disaster. You didn't just catch it, you called it out in a room full of people who would have gladly watched you disappear. She finally spoke. I didn't do it for you. I know, he said. That's why it landed. There was a pause. A quiet hum from the AC unit was the only sound in the room. I don't know who you are, Conrad said, but I want to. Imani blinked once, slowly. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm, steady. I'm someone who sees things, she said. Someone who's spent years being talked over, laughed at, overlooked. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. But none of that stopped me from watching. Conrad nodded, slowly, like a man realizing too late that the smartest person in the room wasn't the one wearing the suit. I'd like to offer you something, he said. Imani didn't flinch. She'd been offered plenty of things before, most of them with strings. Let me guess, she said. A seat at the table? He smiled faintly. No, he replied. A different table. Imani didn't need to pull out a resume to prove herself. Her knowledge didn't come from a corner office or a university lecture hall. It came from years of being the one nobody noticed. I've worked for firms that never knew my name, she said. They sent spreadsheets and expected silence. I gave them results. She looked out through the glass wall, at the Savannah skyline stretching beyond the river. They thought I was just another temporary contractor, a quiet girl from a zip code they never visited, but I read every file, I followed every number, and I remembered. Her voice wasn't bitter. It was factual, like she was reciting weather patterns. Conrad sat across from her, listening more closely than he had in years. Something in Imani's tone was sharper than confidence. It was clarity, a clarity that only came from surviving in the margins. One of the first red flags I saw in Farrell's books, she continued, was a round-trip transfer through a shell company in Belize. It looked like a vendor payment, but the timing was wrong, end of quarter, late-day trade. I flagged it during a contract gig. When I brought it up, the client said it was a clerical error and ended the project the next day. She paused. But I remembered the account code. I remembered the currency conversion. And when I saw your name come up with Farrell at the restaurant, it all came back. Conrad's brow furrowed. You're telling me, he said, that you kept all this in your head? No notes, no files? Imani just nodded. I couldn't afford to keep paper trails. People like me don't get the benefit of the doubt when things go sideways. There was a silence between them, not awkward, just heavy. You said something yesterday, Conrad said finally. Something about being someone who sees things. I am, she replied. Not because I'm special, because I've had to be. She folded her hands again. When you're the only black woman in the room or the hallway, or the invoice chain, you learn to notice what people hope you'll ignore. Conrad leaned back, his silver watch catching the afternoon light. He looked at Imani not as a problem or a surprise anymore, but as something far more dangerous. A mirror. And the image looking back at him didn't blink. Conrad Everhart wasn't used to being nervous when he made offers. But as he sat across from Imani Pierce, something about this conversation felt different. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even a pitch. It was a recalibration of power, of perception, of everything he thought he understood about people like her. I want to bring you in, he said. Not as a charity case, not as a headline, as a consultant. A real one, paid at market rate plus a retention bonus. You'd have full access, freedom to work remotely, whatever you need. He expected hesitation, maybe a polite deferral. What he didn't expect was the way she looked at him, calm, unbothered, unreadable. No, she said simply. Conrad blinked. No, he repeated, like the word had never been used in his office before. Imani leaned forward slightly, her tone even. I'm not interested in patching holes you didn't know you had. I'm not looking to be the genius from nowhere who gets paraded around to make your team look diverse. I'm not here to be a story you tell at your next conference. Conrad opened his mouth, but she kept going. You say you want me to consult, but what happens when I call out the next flaw, or the next executive who's too proud to listen? What happens when I stop being convenient? Her words weren't loud, but they carried weight. I've seen men like you, she continued. You don't change because someone impresses you. You change because someone challenges you and keeps challenging you, even when it makes you uncomfortable. Conrad looked down for a moment, fingers drumming lightly against the table. I respect that, he said at last, more than you know. She stood, smoothing her blazer. I'm not saying never, she said, but if I ever work with you, it'll be on my terms, my schedule, and with a contract that protects my voice, not just your balance sheet. She walked to the door, paused, then turned back. And one more thing. If you want people like me in your company, don't just open the door when we knock. Ask why you didn't see us standing there the whole time. And just like that, she left, leaving behind not just a room full of silence, but a man who, for the first time in a very long time, wasn't sure he was the smartest person at the table. By Monday morning, the whispers had already started. It began in elevators, casual, almost careless. Someone had heard from someone else that Conrad Everhart, the man who once boasted about never losing a deal, had been warned off a major acquisition. By a waitress. No one knew her name at first, just that she worked at the Marigold Room, just that she was young, black, and stunningly calm when she delivered a line that stopped an entire table cold. Some thought it was a joke, others, a publicity stunt. But by midweek, the Farrell deal was officially postponed, and the chatter turned serious. In investment circles, every little move echoes. People watch. They notice when power shifts even by inches. At first, it was just curiosity. Then came the speculation. Who is she? Was it an inside leak? Why would Conrad Everhart listen to someone like her? That last question lingered longer than the others. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was revealing. Because in those halls of polished glass and tailored suits, someone like her was still code for someone who didn't belong. But slowly, the tone started to change. A junior analyst at a rival firm pulled up her LinkedIn profile, bare bones, mostly freelance gigs, no degree listed. Still, he bookmarked it. A partner at a boutique consulting firm sent out a quiet message to his recruiter. Keep an eye on this one. She sees things. Imani didn't know about any of this. She was still clocking into her night shift at the Marigold Room, still paying down her mother's medical debt, still trying to save enough for her little sister's college books. But her name was moving through places she hadn't been invited to yet. And in those same hallways where her voice would have once been ignored, her silence now echoed louder than any pitch deck. Because nothing travels faster than the story of a power player being humbled by someone they never saw coming. And nothing is more dangerous to a fragile ego than the idea that the person they underestimated might just be the one rewriting the rules. Not with money, but with memory, patience, and precision. The kind that lingers long after the door closes. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when Conrad Everhart showed up again, this time with no entourage, no driver, and no watch. He waited at the host stand of the Marigold Room like anyone else. He wore a plain gray sweater and jeans that didn't look tailored. His hair wasn't slicked back. His posture was different, too. Less upright. Less rehearsed. Imani was wiping down a table when she noticed him. Their eyes met. She gave a polite nod, the same she gave every guest. He approached quietly. "Can we talk?" he asked. She hesitated, then gestured toward the side patio, quiet, shaded, mostly empty. They sat across from each other under the canvas awning, the sound of soft rain filling the silence. "My daughter," Conrad began, "is 19. Imani didn't respond, but her eyes softened, just slightly. "She's at Tulane," he continued, "studying business, smart as hell. Too smart to tell me what she really thinks most of the time." He paused, then looked down at his hands. "She's been telling me for months that my world doesn't see people like her, that I keep hiring reflections of myself. I thought she was just young, idealistic." A quiet laugh, dry and self-deprecating. "Then you walked into that room and told me what my entire board was too scared to say." Imani sat still, letting his words land. She knew this wasn't just about a deal. "She asked me last week," he continued, "what kind of man I wanted her to become." His voice caught, just slightly. "And I didn't have an answer, not one I liked." He looked at Imani again, really looked this time. "I came here today because I don't want to be the man who teaches her that power only listens to suits. I want to show her that real strength is recognizing when you were wrong and doing something about it." Imani studied him for a long beat. Then she said, quietly, "That's a start." Conrad nodded, eyes steady. "I don't want to offer you a seat anymore," he said. "I want to build a new table, and I need your help to design it." For the first time, there was no pitch, no angle, just a father trying to be better. And a young woman finally being seen for exactly who she was. 1 year later, the skyline of Savannah looked a little different. The Everhart building still stood tall, its mirrored glass reflecting the river below, but something inside had changed. On the 23rd floor, where the walls used to be lined with silent portraits of men in suits, there was now a small framed photo near the reception desk. It was a candid shot, Imani Pierce, standing at a podium, her hands mid-gesture, her eyes lit with purpose. She wasn't just the keynote speaker that day. She was the moment. The annual Southeastern Finance Summit had never seen a crowd so quiet. Hundreds of professionals, analysts, and executives leaned in as Imani spoke, not with flash or flair, but with clarity, control, and undeniable presence. She talked about risk, about hidden value, about what it meant to build a company where the smartest voice might not come from the corner office but from someone wiping down the conference table after the meeting. And when she finished, the room stood for her. Not because she demanded it, but because truth has a way of rising all on its own. Afterward, she stepped off the stage and walked through a crowd of people who used to think they already knew what leadership looked like. Conrad was there too, off to the side, not making a scene, just watching. He didn't take credit. He didn't need to. Their roles had shifted. Imani was now the head of a new division at Everhart Capital Hidden Worth, a consultancy built to find value where others refused to look. She led a small, diverse team, handpicked not for their resumes, but for their perspective. She still visited the Marigold Room once a month. Not to serve tables, but to sit quietly in the corner booth, order a black coffee, and watch the way the world moved when no one thought it was watching. The tower still stood. The lights still glowed. But the truth had a new seat at the table, and its voice was louder than ever. Not because it shouted, but because this time, finally, everyone was listening. Sometimes, the most powerful story doesn't begin in a boardroom or on a stage. It starts with a small voice in the back of the room, one that was never meant to speak up, one that everyone else was trained to ignore. Imani Pierce wasn't supposed to be the one who changed anything. She wasn't wearing the right shoes, didn't come from the right neighborhood, didn't have the right last name on her resume. But when the moment came, she was ready. Not because someone gave her permission, but because she gave it to herself. That's the lesson. In a world where people are often valued for their titles, their degrees, or their connections, real worth can still come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes, the person who sees the clearest is the one no one's watching. And sometimes, the question isn't whether you belong at the table, but whether the table was ever designed to hear you in the first place. Imani didn't ask for power. She simply refused to pretend she didn't have it. And in doing so, she reminded all of us that truth doesn't need a platform, it just needs courage. The courage to speak when it's easier to stay quiet. To stand when the world says sit. To say, actually I do, when someone laughs and expects you to stay small. This is more than a black story. It's a human one. About resilience, memory, and the quiet revolution of being seen. So wherever you are right now, maybe driving home after a long day, maybe walking your dog, maybe lying awake in a dark room, I hope this story stayed with you. I hope it reminded you that you are not invisible. That your voice, your view, your value, matters. If you believe stories like this deserve a place in the world, you know what to do. Tap that subscribe button so you'll never miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been overlooked or underestimated, share this with them. Let them know they're not alone. Thank you for spending this time with me. This is Hidden Worth, and every story we tell is a reminder. Real value is never loud, but it always leaves a mark.